Chapter 26 The Many Deaths of Scarlett Freeman. June 28, 2086. Central Florida. The UN base at Cape Canaveral was under intense observation. American soldiers, dressed in camouflage, observed the facility in silence amongst the swampy shores of the Indian River. Meanwhile, men who worked for Grey Phoenix posed as truck drivers and entered the base under the guise of regular deliveries, only to depart hours later with a bounty of stolen spaceship parts in their cargo beds. These brazen thefts were aided by infiltrators inside of the base. Some of them were human, and some were not. Just after sunrise, a pair of soldiers emerged from the UN checkpoint on the eastern side of the NASA Causeway Bridge, a structure that connected Cape Canaveral to the mainland. They flashed a pair of yellow cards at the men guarding the checkpoint. The UN soldiers waved and told their comrades to enjoy their day off work. A pair of unarmed troopers, a man and a woman, swiftly walked across the bridge, over the Indian River, and into the city of Titusville. The man kept looking forward, moving with determination. His companion, however, was jittery. She kept gazing around her as though she was constantly being startled by every little noise. Once they were off the bridge and out of sight from the checkpoint, the man reached for his phone and dialed a number. Within minutes, an electric car pulled up along the side of the road and picked up the pair, before turning west and starting the journey to Orlando. About 70 miles away from the Space Center, on the outskirts of the city, Lawrence Ridge breathed a sigh of relief. He had been waiting all night for word on whether Piper Russell had managed to get out of the Space Center. Now that he knew she was on her way back, Lawrence locked up his hotel room and made his way down the road to the Grey Phoenix base. The Orlando scrapyard was a very busy place these days. Grey Phoenix had opened up their facility to not just the Wolverines, but the allies they were slowly bringing into Orlando. General Osmer was camped out here now, and he brought along a substantial force of American soldiers. Colonel Sharp and several of his ancient American comrades were here as well, including members of his own Salish Ktunai tribe. A representative of the Andromedon Sanctuary visited from day to day, and he occasionally brought news of other aliens who were ready to help in the upcoming raid. Lawrence got to the former starship Kakama before anyone else and spent his morning setting up the conference room for today's meeting. He laid out a massive map of Central Florida on the table and placed little red and blue markers on it to show the position of friendly and enemy troops, double-checking the reports by scouts to make sure the data was accurate. Around 9 in the morning, people started to show up. The two mutons who ran the scrapyard, Crew Chief Marga and Shipbreaker Carfu, greeted Lawrence and asked if Piper was coming back today. When he said yes, they seemed to light up. The pair was also worried about their friend. Jay Lansing and Sarah Roberts arrived together, followed shortly by Colonel Sharp. Sharp was looking defeated. His recent efforts to find ancient American people in the area had been fruitless. General Osmer and Inez Espinosa arrived last, talking to each other in low voices and not paying attention to the others until Lawrence called the meeting to order. Okay, folks. Sorry to call you here so early, but Piper and Corsair are on their way back now, and they've got news we need to act on now, Lawrence said. A clatter of feet in the hallway preceded the conference room door slamming open. Piper and her companion burst into the room, panting. Did you start without us? Piper gasped. I tried to, Lawrence replied. Thanks for getting back here so quickly. Hey, Corsair, you can change back if you want to. You've got to be tired. The man who was traveling with Piper gave Lawrence a weak smile. Appreciate it, he rasped. I'll just step outside. The soldier departed and stepped down the boarding ramp. Once he was outside and well clear of the Kakama, the man's body started to violently convulse. His features distorted and melted away with a horrible crunching sound. And a moment later, the gruesome transformation was complete. Instead of a man, there was now a bipedal alien, standing about 10 feet tall and covered from head to foot in brown slime. Piper's companion was a member of the Faceless, a nearly extinct race of alien shapeshifters. During the Second Hyperspace War over 50 years ago, the Faceless were part of the Advent Coalition and functioned as infiltrators and spies, hiding amongst members of the human resistance. Shaking his gelatinous head from exhaustion, Corsair the Faceless stomped off to find a place to rest, leaving a trail of slimy footprints as he went. Back on the Kakama, Piper slammed her fist down on the table and delivered the important news. "Something is happening at Cape Canaveral," she reported. "A transport ship landed at Pad 39A and dropped off about 100 Shrike mercenaries." "Shrike?" Jay repeated. "What are they doing here?" "I'm getting to that," Piper explained. "All of the guards around the base were quietly swapped out for mercenaries in the middle of the night. Shrike has completely taken over security at Kennedy Space Center. And at the same time, they started preparing for an emergency launch." "Did you see what vessel they were preparing?" Emmanuel asked. "One of the cruisers at the Apollo complex," Piper replied. "Probably the Stellaris," Emmanuel said. "It's the only one with a functioning power plant right now. Do you have any clue why they're spooling her up?" "Kind of," Piper answered. "I heard there was a distress signal coming from the North Star, Polaris, and that both Admiral Siajotso and the ISO director gave it the highest priority. That cruiser got picked to be part of the Quick Reaction Force." A murmur ran around the room. "The ISO director?" General Osmer repeated. "You mean Freeman?" "Not Freeman," Jay cut in. "We got word Freeman is dead." "We heard it from your daughter, Espinosa," Sarah added. "She says she heard it from you." "But," Lawrence cut in, "earlier today we got a transmission from the Stormbreakers. Maui told us Freeman's alive. He even gave us the location of her workshop in the Space Center." "Lawrence is right," Piper said. "The intel we got from Maui Riri Nui seems pretty solid." A confused silence filled the room. Everyone was trying to make sense of this conflicting information. People looked from Lawrence to Emmanuel to Piper, hoping that somebody would have the correct answer. "That doesn't add up," Colonel Sharp said. "U.S. Army intel says Freeman is in Oregon right now." "She just left," Piper interrupted. "I heard a bunch of officers saying she's on her way back from Arcadia Bay now. Something about changing priorities and the QRF will leave as soon as she lands in Florida." General Osmer folded his arms. "We need to reestablish, beyond all reasonable doubt, whether or not Director Freeman is alive. This will inform our decision-making, and that of the enemy as well," he said. All eyes turned to Emmanuel. He was not really surprised. After all, the rumor of Scarlett's death had started with him. He reached into his coat pocket and said, "Scarlett is dead. She's been dead the whole time." He produced a faded and yellowed newspaper clipping and placed it down on the table for everyone to see. On the left side of the page was the text of the story, and on the right side was a color photograph of a teenage girl with green eyes and platinum blonde hair. It was an excerpt from the Chicago Tribune, and it said this: "Dead teen identified. Murder investigation announced. August 19th, 2059. The Chicago Police Department has used DNA evidence to identify the corpse of a girl found adrift in Lake Michigan 4 days ago. The body of Scarlett Freeman, age 13, was recovered from the water by local fishermen and turned over to authorities more than 8 days after she was reported missing from Hyde Park. The county coroner has determined the cause of death to be homicide and turned the investigation over to the CPD. Noah and Charlotte Freeman, the girl's parents, were reported missing by the CPD after they failed to show up for an interview the day after their daughter vanished. Hyde Park Academy, where Scarlett was enrolled as a freshman, will be closed for the remainder of the week and is offering free counseling services to her classmates. Emmanuel looked up at the room around him. The woman I married told me her name was Scarlett Freeman, that her parents were called Noah and Charlotte, that she was a native of Chicago, and that she graduated from Hyde Park Academy. The woman who shared my bed for 2 decades, who is running the ISO, my daughter's mother? I don't know who she is, but she is not Scarlett Freeman. The real Scarlett was murdered and dumped in a lake almost 30 years ago. That woman is an imposter. There was a stunned silence. For a few seconds, nobody could say anything. Then the muton shifted. Shipbreaker Carfu walked around the table and came to a stop in front of Emmanuel. She stared hard into his eyes for a moment, then blinked. You know, Carfu said. You already know the truth, but you are too scared to admit it. Your fear is justified. Carfu turned to the group. Everyone, I think we can confirm the professor's story today and prove the true identity of the woman claiming to be Scarlett Freeman. Though I think we all share the same suspicion. Allow me a moment. Carfu stepped to the far side of the room and then pushed a wall panel. It retracted upwards, revealing a computer terminal. While the group watched, Carfu activated the hyperwave relay and initiated a call. Connection established. Faster than light communication enabled, said a serene, computerized voice. A moment later, hologram emitters projected an image into the room. A Levakian male appeared, shaking his mane by way of greeting. Thank you for contacting the Emerald Institute, the holographic Levakian said. Are you looking up information, or do you need to speak to an Institute representative? I am seeking information about the paradox, Carfu said. We need a copy of her genetic code for comparison. The Levakian nodded. The Emerald Institute carries on the legacy of the Asalele Conclave of Telepaths, destroyed by the paradox in 1928, he said. To that end, we archive all known data about the paradox. However, if you believe you have encountered her, we strongly suggest you contact the Galactic Defense Force. Carfu nodded. Understood. Please transmit the genetic data now. The Levakian obliged, giving the following explanation as he did so. This genetic data was taken from the Paradox during her first appearance aboard the XCOM warship Avenger in 2035. It is the most up-to-date profile of her the Institute possesses. With luck, we'll have an updated profile for you in a matter of hours, Carfu said before terminating the call. Piper bounced up and down on the balls of her feet. Oh, I think I know what the plan is already. Emmanuel gave Piper a smile. He reached into his pocket again and produced a second prop. When the real Scarlett Freeman was born, Chicago was under UN control, he said. Which means... Lawrence smacked himself in the face as he realized the truth. Then he interrupted. She was born in a gene therapy clinic. The UN has a genetic profile of the real Scarlett. Emmanuel nodded and placed a small thumb drive on the table. His voice full of contempt, Emmanuel said, Plug that into any genetic sequencer. You'll see the real Scarlett Freeman. Born in Chicago on March 8, 2046. Attended Hyde Park Academy. Caucasian, green eyes, blonde hair. Murdered a decade and a half before I married an imposter wearing her face and name. The person I thought I loved who I had a daughter with, all that's left of her is on this drive. A few hours later, the hastily assembled plan was put into action. Piper and Corsair the Faceless returned to the Space Center, once again in their disguises as UN soldiers. As they crossed the NASA Causeway Bridge, they were followed at a distance by a cargo truck. It was being driven by 2 human members of Grey Phoenix, and there were an additional 5 hiding in the back of the truck. As soon as Piper and Corsair reached the checkpoint, a pair of Shrike mercenaries approached them and said, "Where have you been, soldiers? The base is on general alert. Get inside and get to your posts before we tell your commander you were playing hooky." Corsair, in human form once again, stuck his thumb out at the approaching supply truck. "They're with us," he said. "They got lost in town and we had to guide them back." The mercenary took one look at the truck, nodded, and waved them through. No IDs were checked. No paperwork examined. The truck was not searched. As soon as the infiltrators entered the base, they parted ways. The supply truck turned a corner and made a beeline for the Divine Atelier. Coming to a stop at the Apollo Center, the 2 drivers got out, ran around the back, and opened it. 5 human members of Grey Phoenix, all wearing UN Navy uniforms, clambered out, and each one grabbed a tool case by the handle. They started walking purposefully towards the gangway that led to the Stellaris. Just like the main gate, the gangway was guarded by Shrike. "We're with the crew," one of the Grey Phoenix men said in a confident tone. "We need to board right away." The mercenaries stood aside and allowed the 5 saboteurs to board Stellaris without a word. Meanwhile, Corsair and Piper started making their way to Scarlett's workshop. They were acting on the paid intel transmitted by the Stormbreakers from Arcadia Bay. Inez and Corsair were frustrated to learn that the Divine Atelier was right next door to the dry dock. From here, Piper could see the Grey Phoenix saboteurs boarding the Stellaris. She forced herself to relax. There was an identical team stationed aboard the battleship Charlemagne, and according to Carfu, they had not been caught yet. Grey Phoenix knew how to infiltrate warships. Corsair tried the door. "Locked," he said. "Fingerprint scanner on the door. Hold on a moment." Corsair and Piper looked around, spotting 2 security cameras on the side of the building. Corsair walked around the far corner into an area where the cameras had a blind spot. With a gross and repulsive crunching sound, Corsair shapeshifted, changing into a completely different human. In seconds, Corsair went from being a Caucasian soldier to a Latin American officer. The Faceless stepped back into view and pressed his thumb to the scanner. A green light illuminated the pad, and the heavy door swung inwards and open. The 2 infiltrators were expecting the place to be full of engineers and scientists, hard at work on the Prometheus project, but instead, it was quite empty. The halls were quiet, and the offices were starting to accrue a fine layer of dust. "No one's been here in a while," Corsair commented. "Are you sure this is the place?" Piper nodded. "Maui said he got the intel from Erin Hyatt herself." "The cult is selling out the ISO, huh?" Corsair said. "What kind of war is this?" They started searching. Offices, break rooms, and latrines were thoroughly examined. Piper opened up her backpack and withdrew a portable DNA sequencing machine. This would be nowhere near as useful as a fully staffed gene therapy clinic, but it did not need to be. All Piper was looking for was genetic confirmation that Scarlett Freeman was lying about her own identity. Piper and Corsair put on latex gloves to prevent leaving their own traces behind. Then each took a handful of cotton swabs and started wiping them across anything that a person may have touched. The search was on. Very quickly, Piper found a second-floor hallway that contained a row of living spaces. Each apartment was big enough to sustain a person, and they all looked recently lived in. Like the rest of the building, though, they were empty. Piper and Corsair picked an apartment and set about burglarizing it, searching for evidence. Just before vanishing off the grid earlier in the day, Maui Riri Nui had transmitted a message to the Wolverines, warning them that Scarlett Freeman was not only alive, but that she was working on some all-important secret project in the Apollo Center. So far, however, Piper and Corsair were not finding much evidence to support that claim. These apartments clearly belonged to whatever workers operated in the Apollo Center. It was highly unlikely that any of them would belong to Freeman. As the director of the Internal Security Office, Scarlett would most likely live somewhere in Berlin, near ISO headquarters. But there was always a possibility that Scarlett might sleep here from time to time, so the rooms had to be checked. Breaking into a second apartment, Piper found an ID card on top of a dresser and gasped loudly enough to get Corsair's attention. The Faceless jogged over to her in a strange fashion that almost betrayed his true nature. "What is it?" he asked. "It's her," Piper said. "We found Inez." The ID card contained a recent picture of Inez Espinosa, complete with her full name and new Florida address. Reading the card, Piper giggled when she realized that Inez had two middle names. Then she gasped. "Holy Mother of Jericho! Inez joined the ISO!" Corsair looked down at the card and realized the same thing. Inez was, in fact, listed here as an employee of the UN spy agency. On the left side of the card was a small gold chip, indicating that this card could be used as a key card at electronically locked doors. Quickly, Piper wiped down the card with a swab and preserved a sample of Inez's DNA for later analysis. Piper and Corsair intensified their search, this time looking for any doorways that required a keycard. In mere moments, they found one. Piper swiped Inez's card and followed Corsair down a flight of stairs. Then, the pair of infiltrators found themselves in the belly of the Divine Atelier. The workshop was massive, and so full of devices and machines and contraptions that neither Corsair nor Piper knew where to start. Finally, they both shook off their feelings and set to work. Piper and Corsair both withdrew digital cameras from their pockets and started documenting everything. Neither of them understood what these contraptions were, but they took photos of them anyway. Piper took great interest in a metal chair with heavy cuffs on the armrests, while Corsair shapeshifted into a Vanian, using his wings to fly the length of a particle accelerator and take pictures of it. Finally, both of them spent minutes taking pictures of a large collection of deactivated androids, all of whom were standing upright and frozen in various positions, as though they were turned to stone in the middle of some mundane task. When Corsair landed, he and Piper shared an excited high five. "This is a treasure trove of intel," Piper declared. "Freeman, or I guess the woman pretending to be her, is running her own secret weapons program down here. The Americans, Great Phoenix, hell, even the GDF could do wonders with all of this. Heck, if this is all really off the books like Maui said, we could even turn the UN against her." "Agreed," Corsair said. Then he checked the clock on the wall. "We've got about half an hour until our saboteurs are finished with the Stellaris. Let's sweep the place and find Scarlett's DNA." But before either of them could take a step in any direction, there was a loud clanging sound as the workshop door abruptly swung open and the voice of a man called out, "Hey down there! Can you give us a hand with this?" Piper and Corsair froze. The Faceless was so alarmed that he instinctively shapeshifted into a small Lavakian cub and hid behind Piper's legs. "No!" Piper hissed at Corsair. "We gotta act like one of them. Be cool, be confident. We belong here." Piper had plenty of experience in the world of espionage. She had been a spy for both the Americans and Grey Phoenix when she was younger, and this was the second time she infiltrated the ISO. Piper drew on this experience as she hurried up the stairs and called back in an exasperated tone, "Hold your horses, man, I'm coming!" Reluctantly, Corsair shapeshifted back into a military officer and followed her. Up on the main floor, a large number of UN Navy personnel were trying to quickly dismantle a hyperwave relay and package it into boxes. There were 8 men in total setting about the task. Piper gave Corsair a look that just said, "Go with it," and she grabbed a power drill. Together, Piper and Corsair helped the men finish their task. And after about 10 minutes, the device normally used for FTL communication was in many small pieces, all of which were neatly packed away in reinforced cases for transport. The group's leader, a Navy lieutenant, waved his hand towards the front door. "All right, folks, let's move out. We've got a deadline to meet and..." But before he could finish speaking, 2 people ran through the doorway and into the Apollo Center. Piper and Corsair felt their hearts drop into their stomachs as Scarlett Freeman herself suddenly appeared. She was being closely followed by a UN Army Central Officer, but Piper did not know who he was. The sudden appearance of Scarlett and her companion was not what alarmed Piper, but rather how rough they looked. Scarlett had cuts and bruises on her arms and face, and looked in general like she had been in a fight mere hours beforehand. And she was acting like it too. Scarlett completely ignored everyone around her and quickly pushed past the group, moving quickly and deliberately towards the stairway that led to the 2nd floor. The whole time, she was speaking to the central officer behind her. "We've got no choice. If we do literally anything else, then this catastrophe will only get worse and worse." Moving away at the first opportunity, Piper and Corsair broke from the main group of Navy men and followed the ISO director at a distance, hardly daring to believe their luck. At the top of the stairs, Piper felt her heart jump into her mouth. Scarlett power walked down the hallway, made a sharp left turn, and saw the doorway to Inez Espinosa's apartment, which was still wide open and the apartment itself freshly burgled. Scarlett reacted like a person whose worst fears had been confirmed. She screamed, "I knew it! I knew it! That's how those bastards knew to show up! They've been here!" The central officer looked over Inez's room. "It's been completely ransacked," he said. "I'll call security." It was in this moment, this crucial life or death instant, where all of Piper's previous experience as a spy came into play. In a mere moment, Piper made a plan that would simultaneously get herself out of trouble and give her the information she needed. Without waiting for Corsair, Piper climbed the last few stairs, reached into her pocket, and spoke in a clear voice. "Director Freeman, over here!" Scarlett, or rather the woman pretending to be her, looked up, saw Piper, and quickly walked to her position. The ISO director opened her mouth to speak, but Piper saw this and made sure to get her own words out first, speaking with an authoritative tone. "We already know about that, ma'am," Piper said, pointing at the burglarized apartment. "I have what you're looking for right here." Piper extended a hand, offering Inez Espinosa's ID card to her. Scarlett reached out to take the card, but just when her hand was about an inch away, she froze. Scarlett stared at the bright blue latex glove Piper was wearing. And after a second, she lowered her hand and said, "Sepulveda, take that and secure it. I'm gonna give Nezzy an earful when we catch up to her." Scarlett stepped past Piper and headed toward the stairs. Central Officer Sepulveda snatched the card from Piper's hand and followed. Then there was a second crucial moment. Corsair was still standing on the staircase. He had witnessed Scarlett's hesitation, and he was doing the math in his head. In that brief moment, Scarlett and Sepulveda were facing toward the stairs, away from Piper. Piper and Corsair were making eye contact with one another. Piper slowly moved her mouth and noiselessly formed the word, allergy. Corsair turned around without acknowledging Piper and briskly walked down the stairs ahead of Scarlett and Sepulveda. The ISO director shouted after him, "You! Tell the men to hurry up! We've got to leave now!" "Yes, ma'am," Corsair replied. He broke into a run and reached the bottom of the stairwell. Following behind, Piper strained her ears, desperately hoping Corsair could find a place where he could shapeshift without being overheard. Scarlett and Sepulveda reached the bottom of the stairs and started making their way towards the exit. But before they could leave the building, someone shouted from the outside, "Hey! Whose dog is that? Someone catch it!" And before anyone could do anything, a dog ran into the building. Wagging its tail and slobbering all over the place, an adult Labrador Retriever bounded into the Apollo building, bolted right up to Scarlett, and jumped at her. "Are you kidding me right now?" Scarlett yelled as the dog put its paws on her chest and licked her face. Wriggling with excitement, the Labrador continued pawing at Scarlett until Piper came to her rescue. Getting one hand on the scruff of the dog's neck, Piper dragged it away, apologizing profusely. Scarlett looked like she was about to explode. Fists clenching, the ISO director said, "I don't have time for this! We need to be at Polaris 10 minutes ago!" Sepulveda tried to interject. "Director, we have more time to act than you think. The Charlemagne deliberately used a causality violation in their hyperwave message. We don't have to hurry." "I know how causality breaks work," Scarlett snapped. "Don't lecture me and get your ass out the door!" Scarlett and Sepulveda resumed their departure. Then, at the very last moment, as she was crossing the threshold, Scarlett turned her head to face the heavy metal door, and she sneezed 3 times. Recovering quickly, Scarlett and her central officer departed the building and almost ran down the ramp toward the warship Stellaris, which was showing signs of increasing activity. As soon as Scarlett was out of sight, Piper ran towards the point where she sneezed and wiped down the door with cotton swabs, determined to get a DNA sample for analysis. Then Piper ducked back inside the building to feed the swabs into her genetic sequencer when the sounding of alarms and a deep rumble shook the whole structure. "Hey!" Corsair yelled, having turned back into a man. "The Stellaris is taking off!" "Wait, what?" Piper ran outside just in time to see the Stellaris take flight. The incomplete cruiser rose away from Cape Canaveral, blotting out the sun for a moment and plunging everything below into shadow. With a deep thudding sound from her engines, the Stellaris grew smaller and smaller in the sky until she vanished from view entirely. Piper and Corsair looked at one another. Then Piper said, "The Grey Phoenix team was still on board, weren't they?" "Yeah," Corsair replied. "They're definitely still on that ship. I guess they're hitching a ride." "A ride with her," Piper breathed. "May Jericho have mercy on their souls." Piper and Corsair had seen enough. They did not need to analyze the genetic material. Now they knew what to look for. Their suspicions were well-founded. They both understood the DNA evidence would only confirm what they had already guessed: the true identity of Scarlett Freeman. "We found her," Piper said to herself, in both pure disbelief and raw terror. Akira Robinson, the paradox.